Hello and welcome to Bud's RPG Review, where I give my thoughts on role-playing games, card games and board games. To celebrate my channel passing the 9,000 subscriber mark, and because I haven't done one of these in a while, I've decided to take a look at something that was quite difficult to get hold of. The role-playing starter set for D&D 4th edition by Wizards of the Coast. Yes, that's right, not 5th edition, 4th edition. Okay, first a bit of history. Originally released in 2008, the D&D 4th edition starter set, like all starter sets, was released in order to teach the new edition to players old and new, due to the fairly large changes throughout. It was available as this box set and is still available as a PDF on DriveThruRPG. To the cover. Here we have a decent piece by William O'Connor that is very much of the time, and if you were playing D&D back then, you know exactly what I mean. A good start. Onto the inside. Contained within we have 4 cardboard sheets that contain all manner of tokens and map tiles. There's a fairly basic set of dice, a 16-page quick start guide, and a 62-page Dungeon Master's book. Let's take a look at the quick start guide first. Here we have the same cover of the 4th edition Player's Handbook by Wayne Reynolds, which, however you feel about modern D&D art, is still a good piece. Moving on to the inside, we have a piece welcoming us to the newest edition of the game, mentioning the evolution of the gameplay. It then mentions that D&D is the original role-playing game that created a new form of entertainment, a world of endless possibilities and adventure. We then shift to playing D&D, which contains the usual explanation of the game and also mentions the tokens of monsters and heroes contained. It then moves to the core mechanic, that of explaining what you want to do, rolling a d20, adding or subtracting modifiers, comparing against a target number, and either succeeding or failing. We all know the mechanic. It then talks about skill checks, which is roughly the same, and then attack rolls, which includes a mention of targeting and the difference between ranged and melee attacks. Essentially, the higher the result, the better. Encounters are next. It talks about how the action in D&D is due to encounters, which are not only fight but also social interaction. Essentially combat and non-combat, highlighting the difference between the two, and then it goes to the combat sequence, mentioning the use of the battle grid, and the order being roll initiative, taking surprise rounds, taking turns, rinse and repeat. We then move on to actions, of which there are generally 4. A standard action, of which 1 per turn can be performed, a move action, which you can also take 1 per turn of, a minor action, which you also get another 1 per turn, and finally the free action, which you can take as many of as you like with a reasonable quantity set by the GM. There are also 2 other actions that require triggers before they can be used. An opportunity action, which is used when an enemy lets its guard drop, of which you can take 1 of in each combatant's turn that triggers in a way you can take advantage of, usually an opportunity attack, and the immediate action, which are interrupts and reactions, of which only 1 can be taken per round. Interrupts allow you to act before a triggering action is resolved, thus if it invalidates the action, that action is lost. Reactions are response actions that have a trigger to initiate. Turns are taken as follows. Ongoing damage is deducted first, followed by regeneration if applicable. Other effects are then resolved and no actions can be undertaken. As previously mentioned, a turn is composed of a standard, movement and a minor action. Actions can be taken in any order and even skipped if required. They can also be traded downwards, i.e. a standard or movement action can be converted to a minor action. Extra standard actions can be taken by spending an action point, more on that in a bit. And in addition, other combatants can take free actions on your turn, as well as you being able to take triggered and opportunity actions as well. At the end of the turn, saving throws are made by rolling a d20 and requiring a 10 or more. A success ends the effect of whatever you needed to save against, as some effects will automatically end. No more actions can be taken by you. It then moves on to attacks and damage. Critical hits are scored when you roll a natural 20, and maximum damage is delivered instead of being rolled. Flanking gives combat advantage, though you must be adjacent to an enemy with an ally on the opposite side. Barriers prevent flanking. Those unable to defend provide combat advantage, which is +2 to hit them, though you must be able to see them. Charging gives +1 to hit, though you must move at least 2 squares, and in addition to this, you can use your second wind as a standard action, which allows you to use a healing surge to gain hit points. You get +2 to all defences when you do this. We then focus on movement. There are 3 basic move actions: walk, run and shift. Walking is your movement speed, running is your speed +2, and shifting is the movement of 1 square or 5 foot without provoking an opportunity attack. There's also force movement: pull, push and slide. Pulls are towards you, pushes are away, and slides are in any direction. Force movement is governed by a set of rules. The distance moved is stated in the power being used to perform it. Some powers specify a destination, and that must be used. Force movement doesn't provoke opportunity attacks, and difficult terrain does not hinder this. Force movement doesn't count as the move of the target, they still have one on their turn, and finally all force movement must be into a valid space, i.e. somewhere they could get to themselves by walking. Occupied squares can be moved through if they contain an ally, and not if they contain an enemy. You can only end the move in an ally's square if they are prone, and an enemy's if they are helpless. Difficult terrain costs 1 square of movement extra per square moved, and you can't shift in it. Also, obstacles that fill a square cannot be somewhere a movement is ended in. We then move on to action points. Once per encounter you can spend an action point. These are a finite resource, and when they are gone they don't regenerate. Milestones and adventures award them, and everybody starts the game with 1. Extras are wiped out after an extended rest and reset to 1. Spending an action point gives an extra standard action which the player can trade in for other actions if needed. Moving on, it comes to hit points, healing and dying. Maximum hit points are, well, what you would expect, and in 4th edition there was a condition called Bloodied. When a set of hit points hits half or lower they become bloodied, and some powers only kick in at this point whereas others improve. When 0 hit points is reached they fall unconscious and start dying. Further damage continues to be applied, and if you reach your bloodied number in negative hit points, you're dead. While dying, death saving throws are made. They are at the end of your turn and a d20 roll is made. 10 or higher means nothing happens. Under 10 means they have a fail. Upon 3 fails being reached, they die. Following this are 5 pre-gen characters that are ready to play. It's worth pointing out that the green powers are at will, brown powers are once per encounter, and black powers are daily. As you may imagine, the frequency of the use of the power is commensurate to the potency of the power. The characters are a dwarf fighter, a halfling rogue, an eladrin wizard, a human cleric, and a dragonborn paladin. It's worth pointing out that the powers are included enough to take the character to level 3. Okay, next, let's move on to the second book in the set, the Dungeon Master's book. The cover is the same as the one for the set, so moving on to the inside, it shifts to explaining what a role-playing game is, as well as the role of the Dungeon Master or DM. That being of narrating the story, playing the monsters, designing the dungeon, rewarding the treasure, refereeing the game rules and building the world. It also includes a set of rules for DMs to gain by. When in doubt, make it up. Have fun. Use ability checks. Make sure the players understand that it's not a competition, and equally, it's not your story. Be consistent, don't play favourites, and above all, be fair. Moving on, it goes into playing D&D. This section mostly mirrors the piece in the Player's Handbook in explaining the core mechanic, skill checks and attack rolls. It goes into encounters and talks about the difference between combat and non-combat encounters, and then moves on to the combat sequence, including a list of actions and outcomes. It discusses flanking, combat advantage, and the different attack types, and gives the 3 basic rules of combat: simple rules, many exceptions, specific beats general, and always round down. It goes into targets and attack modifiers, including a list of bonuses and penalties that should be applied, and it also mentions other actions in combat such as Second Wind. Shift and focus, it goes into movement, giving the complete rules for all the different types including force movement, occupied squares and difficult terrain, as well as action points, and then it gives a short but decent list of skills listing what you can or cannot do with them, also giving some information on how to handle knowledge skills and determining what you do and don't know about a subject. We again have hit points, healing and dying covered, as well as rest and recovery, and it details how many experience points you need to get to level 3. We also have a few paragraphs that tell you about the D&D core rulebooks, which includes the Player's Handbook, Dungeon Master's Guide and Monster Manual, as well as the likes of D&D Miniatures, Dungeon Tiles and even D&D Insider. Following this is a full page of conditions and the effects that they have. We then have a page on monster statistics, where it explains how monsters work in 4th edition, and it goes into the likes of immunities, resistances, powers, vulnerabilities and weaknesses. Following this, we have a short introductory scenario called Beneath the Village of Harken, which has just 3 short encounters to give players a taste of the new edition, and then it goes into creating adventures. It details many different kinds of monster roles, things such as artillery, brute, controller, elite, solos and the like, and then shifts to encounter components, which outlines encounter balance and expected target XP totals. We have a section on encounter settings which buys into the key focuses of 4th edition, using variant terrain in order to make things interesting, detailing the likes of why the terrain should have a purpose, encourage interesting choices and making fights more interesting. There's a section on dungeon dressings which has the likes of climbing walls, breaking down doors and opening portcullises. After that we have skill challenges, which talks about the basics such as complexity, which skills can be used and how to run a skill challenge, including a sample negotiation challenge and a combat encounter. There is a section on traps and hazards which covers the likes of spotting, disarming and triggering traps and how to differentiate between the two, even giving us some samples such as a pit trap, rock slide and spear gauntlet. There's a page on creating dungeons and random encounters which goes into tile usage, corridors and chambers. After this we have a fairly decent section on monsters which includes a few young dragons, jellies, a decent selection of goblins and hobgoblins, different types of combats of humans such as rabbles, bandits and guards, as well as kobolds of varying strengths and a few different orcs. There's a section on rats and rat swarms, as well as a few undead such as skeletons and spectres, a couple of differing spider types, as well as the classic sturge, some wolves and a couple of zombie types. The last page is a simple 8x10 battle map, and this is followed by the expected advertisements for the miniatures game in D&D Insider. I know the question among a number of you will be, why D&D and why 4th edition for a celebration on hitting a subscriber goal? Well, the answer is actually quite simple. D&D is the game I've probably played and ran the most over the years, and as such, D&D as a whole is a game I know a lot about, though looking at my channel content you probably wouldn't see that. 3rd edition I played minimally, but when 4th edition appeared, it was the first time a brand new version of the game could be played collectively by our then new gaming gang, a group that still plays together regularly all these years later. Now, I'm going to say something that I know a lot of D&D fans hate, but it's something I truly believe, and in the context of somebody who played in 2 4th edition campaigns from level 1 to level 19 and level 20 respectively, I've seen both the best and worst of it. D&D 4th edition was not the D&D we recognised. There, I said it. And if you disagree, that's fine. I tend to find that when people make fun of 4th edition and are then confronted with the question, have you ever played it? The answer is most often no. It seems to have become not only a meme in the gaming community, but also the whipping boy for the beloved 5th edition, a bandwagon for people to jump on. However, under the bonnet, 5th edition owes far more to 4th edition than many are comfortable admitting. I can give you some examples. Healing hit dice in 5th edition. They're healing surges from 4th edition. Death saves were an invention of 4th edition. 5th edition at-will cantrips. They were at-will powers from 4th edition. Short rest and long rest abilities in 5th edition. Encounter and daily powers from 4th edition. Rituals that don't use spell slots. Yeah, you guessed it. I could go on, but I hope you get the point. A lot was left on the table when shifting from 4th to 5th edition. The cosmology in 4th edition was frankly excellent and really well thought out. 4th edition was also the last of a version of the beloved Dark Sun setting. There are also some really cool classes that were entirely left out of 5th edition. One particular one that springs to mind is the Warlord, a healer that used inspiration and commands for healing and support, thereby bypassing the requirement of a cleric in order to gain healing for those who wanted to play someone who didn't necessarily believe in the gods. 4th edition also introduced the idea of roles to D&D, the controller, defender, leader or striker, though it was obvious that the likes of the popularity of World of Warcraft at the time directly influenced this decision. The biggest issue that at least I saw at the time was the sheer volume of books that Wizards of the Coast produced for the setting. Compared to previous editions, there were pages and pages of classes and races to play, which gave a sense of analysis paralysis at times and meant it was expensive to follow. Unfortunately, 4th edition had other issues to contend with, the main one in my experience being conditions in combat. It became, quite frankly, ridiculous to follow and dragged combat encounters out far, far longer than they needed to be. In one of the campaigns I played in, we had an encounter with the Dracolich that lasted 3 full sessions. Yes, you heard that right, 3 sessions. Not hours. This was due to conditions and the way solar monsters activated powers at various points in the combat. It meant that there were long stretches of time where people sat silent and twiddled their thumbs, and this was one of those points where it didn't feel much like D&D, with every turn causing players to re-evaluate the battlefield and recalculate bonuses and penalties for optimum performance. Another thing a lot of players disliked was the homogeneousness of character powers. At times it seemed like a different class had essentially the same power, just with different flavour text in order to maintain game balance. And other times a character's efficiency could swing wildly between good and fairly incompetent simply based on power selection. This in part led to the proliferation of character optimization forums where powers were rated from red, bad, to gold, must have, and only further homogenized characters as everybody ended up having carbon copies in order to be truly effective. With all of these problems you would think that it was terrible to play, and yes, 3-session Dracolich encounters were the exception rather than the rule. But in general, I had an absolute blast playing 4th edition. The campaigns were really well done, and you never felt completely outclassed. There were moments where victory would pull from the jaws of defeat, and really, isn't that most of what we want out of our beloved hobby? Now, some of you may have noticed that I haven't talked about my thoughts on the starter set yet. Well, that's by design. It's pretty difficult to get this particular version, and honestly, it's actually not bad. It gives you plenty to pique your interest enough to buy the core rulebooks, even if the set, as a whole, is a tad on the flimsy side. This is one of the instances where I'm not going to give the game a score, and I have a good reason. I think giving the entire 4th edition game a score based on the starter set is a bit unfair, as still waters run deep with this game. All I can suggest is that if you ever get a chance to play 4th edition, then at least consider it and make your own mind up rather than listening to the opinions of people who often haven't given it the time of day. If you enjoyed this review, please make sure to hit the thumbs up, subscribe to my channel and check out my other videos. Also, if you're interested in buying this product, I'll put some links below. Lastly, if you like what I produce here, then maybe think about supporting me on Patreon or even becoming a member of my YouTube channel. But out.